My name is Joanne. I am 47 years old. I teach high school history, and I live in the misty, heavily wooded suburbs of upstate New York. There is a specific kind of trap in American families. It's called the caretaker trap. It happens slowly. A parent gets sick, and one child, usually the unmarried daughter, is quietly expected to give up her entire life to keep the family home running. For 7 grueling years, I was my father's full-time caregiver. He had early-onset dementia. I bathed him, I managed his medications, and I watched the man I loved slowly fade into a shadow. I have 2 siblings. My older brother, Richard, is a wealth manager in Manhattan. My younger sister, Chloe, is a wellness influencer in Los Angeles. Over those 7 years, they visited exactly 3 times. Whenever they did visit, they treated our childhood home like a gloomy bed and breakfast. Richard would complain about the Wi-Fi. Chloe would burn sage in the living room to clear the heavy energy before flying back to California. Neither of them ever offered a dime for Dad's care. They just patted me on the back, told me I was an angel, and left me to deal with the night terrors and the hospital bills. When my father finally passed away last November, I was exhausted. I was grieving, but mostly I was ready to finally start my own life. The funeral was a circus. Richard and Chloe sobbed loudly for the cameras, playing the parts of devastated children. 3 days later, we sat in a mahogany-paneled attorney's office in downtown Albany for the reading of the will. That is when the knife went in. My father's estate was worth about $2.5 million, mostly wrapped up in our massive 50-acre historic property. The attorney cleared his throat and handed us the documents. Richard and Chloe had secretly flown Dad to a different lawyer a year prior. While his mind was failing, they convinced him to rewrite the will. They left me a flat $10,000. They took everything else. I sat there, staring at the paper. Richard had the nerve to reach over and squeeze my shoulder. He said, "Joanne, it's only fair. You've been living in the house rent-free for 7 years. Chloe and I have real estate portfolios to think about. We already have a developer lined up to bulldoze the house and build luxury condos." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just felt my blood turn to ice. I told them I needed a few weeks to pack up my things. They generously gave me 30 days before the bulldozers arrived. But here is the thing about being the invisible caretaker for 7 years. You know where all the bodies are buried, literally and figuratively. I knew every cracked pipe, every drafty window, and every old filing cabinet in that massive, rotting house. I knew my father's deepest secrets. While packing the basement, I found Dad's old steel lockbox. Inside were documents from the late 1970s. Before the zoning laws changed, my father had run an unregulated chemical processing business out of the massive barn out back. When the business failed, he didn't pay for proper toxic waste disposal. He buried 6 massive industrial chemical tanks right under the soil. The documents showed that the tanks had started leaking 20 years ago. The soil was completely toxic. The groundwater was contaminated. If the Environmental Protection Agency ever found out, the property would be condemned immediately. It would be classified as a federal Superfund site. The cost to excavate and remediate that level of toxic soil? Millions. Far more than the property was actually worth. Richard and Chloe's fancy city lawyers sent me a stack of paperwork. To expedite their massive real estate deal, they needed me to sign a quitclaim deed and a waiver, legally stating I was surrendering any and all rights to the estate and that they were assuming total ownership of the property as is. They thought they were strong-arming me. They thought I was just a naive country school teacher. I smiled. I signed every single page in blue ink. I legally severed myself from the estate, the land, and the liability. I took my $10,000, packed my Honda Civic, and bought a beautiful, cozy, meticulously inspected townhouse 2 towns over. On the morning of my closing, I drove to the post office. I dropped a thick, anonymous manila envelope into the mailbox, addressed to the State Department of Environmental Conservation. The envelope contained copies of my father's maps, the chemical manifest, and exact coordinates of the buried tanks. 3 days later, the state authorities descended on the property. They halted the developers' bulldozers. They brought in soil testing rigs. They found the heavy metals. The entire 50-acre estate was immediately surrounded by chain-link fencing and bright yellow hazard signs. Because Richard and Chloe had eagerly signed those as-is ownership papers to cut me out, they inherited the liability, all of it. The developers pulled out and sued them for breach of contract. The EPA mandated a federally enforced cleanup. My brother had to liquidate his Manhattan penthouse to pay the initial environmental fines. My sister had to file for bankruptcy. The inheritance they stole became a multi-million-dollar prison. I heard Richard tried to claim I knew about the tanks, but because he was the one who manipulated an old man into changing his will, the courts had zero sympathy for him. It's a beautiful Sunday morning here in upstate New York. I am sitting on the balcony of my condo, drinking a cup of premium roast coffee. The air is clean, the water is pure, and my conscience, it's completely clear.